Hello and welcome to this afternoon's session on the place standard. I'm Kat Hassler and I'm going to be chairing the session today. There's still people popping in slowly, so I'll keep going slowly. I want to say thank you to Education Scotland, to Nicola Sykes and her team for inviting us to do this session today. Part of the CLD Managers webinar series, and we're going to be looking at the Place Standard tool. I am Place Outcomes Lead at the Scottish Government, and I'm been working on in and around the Place Standard tool for the last 4 or 5 years now, 4 years. And I originally joined Scottish Government from Public Health Scotland, so my background's in public health, and Public Health Scotland, formerly NHS Health Scotland, are one of the core partners behind the Place Standard tool. So we're going to give you an overview of the Place Standard tool, what it is, how it works, how it can be used, and then I'm also delighted that we've got 3 different case studies who are going to talk to you about their real life experiences of using the Place Standard tool. And how it can be applied in your context. Can I just say, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions as you go along through the chat. My colleagues, Education Scotland colleagues Nicola and John, are going to help me monitor the questions as they come. Keep your microphones muted, please, while speakers are speaking. But there'll be a chance to ask some initial questions after the first introductory session, just briefly for clarification, and then at the end we've got half an hour for much more in-depth discussion with all of the panel. So look forward to hearing from all of you, and I'm sure we will learn as much from your questions and your experiences as you will from us. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to my colleague Sandy Robinson, who's going to give you an overview of the Place Standard tool. Thank you. Oh, and I should say, please introduce yourselves in the chat as well as you go along if you feel like it.
Thanks, Kat. So I'm Sandy Robinson. I work with Kat in the Planning and Architecture team at Scottish Government. My background is as an architect, but like everybody involved in Place Standard, working right across the Place agenda, and community development is actually an area where we have an embryonic bit of knowledge, so it's really great opportunity today actually to be able to engage with you there. So what I plan to do is to take you through what the tool is, but a little bit of preamble around the Place agenda itself, and then some information about inequalities, particularly health inequalities, which were a big driver for why we developed the tool in the first place. So just on Place, and hopefully you can all see the slides moving, Kat, let me know if they're not, but what do we mean by Place when we're talking about Place in this context? Well, for us, it means, well, it's driven by 3 things. One is the physical environment in which we live, and that's probably the area which people would most commonly think that architecture and planning are interested. But we are equally, if not more, interested in people and how they inhabit these spaces, and then the interaction between people and the environment themselves too. So that interaction, that quality of life that is derived from the physical and social environment is certainly something which we consider to be at the heart of Place itself. And when we talk about Place, we in the past have often shown images like this, which is of the sort of blue-eyed and blonde-haired children enjoying places in a pretty aspirational way. But we're equally aware, if not more aware, of the negative impacts that Place can have and how that can impact on the quality of life for people, their economic, social, cultural and health opportunities that they experience, whether that's to do with the housing they live in, high streets, deprivation, the immediate environment around them. And even as an architect, previously used to design places with a certain sort of image in mind of how they would be delivered and how they would be inhabited. But the former chief planner, Jim McKinnon, was always very good at saying there's a a very small distinction between a vision for a place and a hallucination. So we're very aware that actually the implementation of what a vision is for a place can be very vulnerable to social change. And these social changes can have a huge impact on the quality of life that people have, the systems of change that communities have to endure, the impact that has on their health, their well-being, their understanding of themselves and the environment in which they live too. And so around the place agenda, the place principle was adopted by Scottish Government and COSLA a couple of years ago now. And that is really just to try and foster more collaboration, to get people to understand that place itself is a complex environment. It changes constantly. And if we're going to maximise the outputs that we can for quality of life and for communities, then we really need to be working across the piece. It's about combining resources, collaborating, and thinking, obviously, about the outcomes for communities themselves. So I won't dwell too long on the place principle itself. Some of you may be familiar with this, but it is about making sure that people are working with a view to the end result every time. And one of the drivers for us was very much around health inequalities and the evidence that exists around environment and the health and well-being of communities that inhabit that place too. So the environment around us, it provides us with our basic needs. It can be hazardous in terms of air quality or traffic, can be detrimental to your health. But the thing we're really interested in is that it can create and nurture health too. So the environment around you can be seen very much as an asset for people. And the consequences of not being focused on these types of inequalities are writ large, I think, across many communities in Scotland. And this is an example of how within a few miles across Glasgow, there is a difference of over 14 years in life expectancy for men. Much of that is to do with the sort of systemic inequality. And what we've been interested in is how the built environment and the social environment are connected to that. So this is about the theory behind it, work that NHS Health Scotland and Public Health Scotland did around the social determinants of health too. So there are some fundamental causes, and they can be global forces, climate change, political priorities. But then there are wider environmental influences and the individual experiences which people endure or enjoy depending on the quality of environment in which they're into. So it's that central part of that diagram there where our interest has been most focused, and that is around things like economy, physical activity, the social environment, opportunities to learn, to feel a part of place, and the social and cultural environment within a community too. And we know that there are obviously some great benefits of being active in your local community. And so, for instance, 30 minutes of moderate activity, 5 days a week, which is really just a brisk walk, could be to and from work if you're lucky enough to be in that position. But it can have a really significant impact on reducing the rates of chronic and acute disease there too. So it's not just about being physically fit, but it can have a real impact on issues like dementia and cancer too. And yet we know, and this is actually figures that are derived from surveys in England, that 19% of people walk for 20 minutes less than once a year or never. So around a fifth of the population are never walking for 20 minutes at all. And a lot of that is to do with the physical environment in which they live, whether they feel the need to walk, whether they have opportunity to walk, and whether that opportunity is actually a pleasant thing to do with your day, or whether it's something you would want to avoid too. And physical environment, when you design it for people to walk, then they are more likely to walk. And almost 80% of journeys under 1 mile are made on foot. So the relationship between people's propensity to engage and to get out and to be part of the community and the physical environment, the quality of that is really significant too. And a lot of the connection then between how you're motivated to engage with your environment is around the quality of the physical, but also the social environment in which you live too. So the idea of the sense of coherence, of feeling that you belong in a place, that you have a strong identity and connected to your community, was taken up by Aaron Antonovsky, who was an American social anthropologist. And what he looked into was the link between chronic stress that you would feel as part of your life, much of which will be to do with your social environment, some of it economic, family reasons. But we know that there are issues within the built and natural environment which can increase chronic stress, and that's linked to early mortality. And Sir Harry Burns, who's the former Chief Medical Officer at Scottish Government, now Chair of Global Public Health, he took that work forward too, and he was keen to show that the biology of this is absolutely clear, and it's time to start acting on the evidence around that to fix chaotic and difficult circumstances in people's lives. And this was a document which really took that forward, which was led by Glasgow Centre for Population Health, which showed that poverty and deprivation are key drivers of premature mortality, up to 30% higher in Glasgow than in Liverpool and Manchester, which were comparative cities as part of this study. And the Glasgow effect, as it was called, was due to the heightened vulnerability of historical social-economic processes. And what we in our area were interested in is the relationship of the built environment there too. So issues like overcrowding, the quality of the environment around people were very significant. The nature and scale of urban change in Glasgow was hugely significant. What it did is it selected some people for opportunity, and it left many people behind too. And poor quality areas had a big impact on people's ability to thrive, and the imbalance in investment was significant too. So you can see changes in urban form about how places used to be planned and the types of changes that took place in post-war planning, and they led to changes in the opportunity.
So I think he can, but I don't know.
I think he can, and it's quite...
Hello, can people hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Sandy.
Sorry, I was getting a bit of feedback there. Okay, so just on that, the public health priorities for Scotland have picked up on this too, and one of the priorities there is about Scotland being a vibrant, healthy place which is safe for communities, and the idea of the resilience that places can provide for people too. And perhaps we have seen that strongly in many places through the pandemic, where communities have been able to build on existing social capital and other areas which perhaps have not had that ability. So the place standard is founded really on these this evidence and these motivations too. And it stems as a tool itself from two sources. One was the Architecture and Place Policy of Scottish Government, and also this work, Good Places, Better Health for Scotland's Children. And what that work did is that highlighted the need for a neighbourhood quality standard in Scotland for asset development. So these two projects became aligned, and we took forward the Place Standard tool itself. The purpose of it was and still is to maximise the potential of the physical and the social environment to support health, well-being and a high quality of life. So finally, what is the Place Standard tool? I did have a small animation which I was going to show you, which actually is not working right now, but we can probably share that after the webinar. But the Place Standard is just an assessment tool. It's been used really effectively in many areas, but what it does is it sets out to help people have conversations about the quality of environment in which they live too. It can evaluate places which are well established, which are undergoing change, or new places that are still being planned. As I say, it's based on the evidence that I've outlined. And it is around 14 simple questions. I'll run through them very quickly in a moment too, but it can be undertaken by anyone at all. It's been designed to be free, accessible. It can be taken forward by groups, facilitated or initiated within communities themselves, or by individuals, local authorities, large-scale assessments if need be, or equally it could be a small group of interested members of the community who want to look at a particular issue. What it does is it produces two things, which I'll come on to. The most obvious of which is this diagram you see there. It's a radar diagram, which in some ways encapsulates the feelings of the local community about the quality of environment. The principles behind it: what do I need to live my life? How do I get there? And is the experience good enough? But really at the heart of what the success we've had so far with the tool is about the right conversations. Are we having the right conversations with the right people at the right time to change things for the better? These are the current themes and questions. We have just undertaken a thorough review of the tool, and so there have been some changes to the questions here. Nothing fundamental, but it does look at a range of themes, from things like moving around, public transport, to housing, onto more of the social and cultural issues too, about interaction between people, a sense of identity and belonging, and whether people feel safe in an area. What happens is the tool has a scale of 1 to 7, and you're asked an overarching question about that particular theme. So here, this is a screenshot from the online version of the tool. And the question is, can I easily walk and cycle around using good quality routes? You then give that a rating from 1 to 7. You're invited to add some text to that as well to describe the reasons for that, which we encourage people to do, because it is meant to be about conversations rather than just the score output. We have some prompts there to help people to come to an assessment of what they believe their score should be. And at the end of the day, the scores are plotted on this diagram, which is kind of a radar diagram. It's an asset map, really, of the place, and a summary of what people in the local area think. As I say, the outputs are there are two elements to that. One is the physical output, which is the diagram, and communities like to see that replayed back to them so they can get that immediate picture. You can also overlay disparate views within communities, if that's through population groups, age ranges, and understand how different parts of the community feel differently about the environment. But probably more important, we've found in using the tool are the conversations that are derived from that too, the connections which are made within local communities. And that dialogue itself has become a rich part of how action is taken forward afterwards. It can be used in a whole host of settings, and I think some of the case studies that we'll come on to might be able to bring that to life. But the tool itself is merely about getting people talking about the right types of issues. It's not about trying to fill that diagram with the shaded area. The tool really is about trying to plot improvement. So you can take a baseline assessment, and then over time you could reassess and establish whether the improvements in the areas where you are targeting action are having an impact or not. So just to summarise, it is a tool which translates the public health and quality of life issues which are described in placemaking theory into an accessible tool. It's about participation. It's about getting people involved in a holistic appreciation of the environment around them rather than just on single issues. Its biggest drivers so far in our use of the tool have been around public health, and more in climate change, and how communities and marginalised communities particularly might be involved in climate change discussions. And the huge driver for us is about inequality, whether that is systemic inequalities within communities or whether that is about social inequalities or health inequalities too. So that's enough for me for the moment, I think, and so I will pass back to Kat.
Thank you, Sandy, for that very comprehensive and insightful introduction to the tool. We're going to go straight on to a contribution from Irene Beautyman from the Improvement Service, another one of the core partners behind the Place Standard tool. She's going to give us an overview of place-based working, the place principle, and how you focus on outcomes. So Irene, over to you. And as I said, questions in the chat, and we can pick some up at the end.
Thank you. I'm doing that thing where I can't multitask and get my slideshow up at the same time. Hold on. So My job at the moment, I think it is interesting to be able to give background here, is from 30 years of working in local government and now working for the Improvement Service and Public Health Scotland. So the Improvement Service is very much in a role of supporting local government on delivering their contribution to national outcomes, place-based approaches and so on. If you can't see my presentation, let me know, but if you can, that's fine. I'll keep going.
I can see it.
Great.
Hopefully everyone else
And
can.
obviously for Public Health Scotland, they sit with as one of the organisations delivering on Scotland's public health priorities. But the remit sits very strongly in local government to deliver the actual things that can deal with those kind of aspects that Sandy was just talking about, those social determinants of health. So my role is that cross between, we've got all the expertise and data in Public Health Scotland, and then we've got local government there able to have the remit to do something about it, and linking those two up. So what I want to do today is give a bit of context of where the place standard tool can be used, given where we are in Scotland at the moment coming out of a pandemic, and the importance being put on place, and then where it sits as that transfer down into the importance of people and their needs and their aspirations, and feeding that back up into culture change, policy change, whatever change we're going to need to address as we come out of the pandemic. Sandy covered a bit about place there. I would add, when we're talking about place-based approaches in Scotland, it's the fact that every place is different, so we need to take a different approach in every place, be that a street outside your window, a town or a country. They're all slightly different, but they have three key elements to them. They'll always have that physical bit, the planet, the town, the pavement, the field. They'll always have the people, the different cultures, the different groups of people, those protected characteristics of people, and those suffering and not suffering from inequalities. And they're always in a place will be the economic side, the work that people are doing, the investment that we all put into the roof over our head, whether we've bought it, we're renting it, we're borrowing it, and the investment into the pavement outside when we walk out, and all the organisations that invest in an area as well. And all three of those interact in every place. That is the basis of place-based approaches, is to be thinking about the fact that we have all three of those and that they interact. This quote I always use to give the best example of that, whereby obesity, inactivity, depression and loss of community has not happened to us by some fluke. Rather, we legislated, subsidised and planned it. We didn't do it deliberately. We didn't intend to cause all of those sufferings in the first half of that statement. We went in well-intentioned to do an intervention in one of those elements of a place, and it had unintended consequences prevalently on people. And that place-based approaches is thinking about the interventions that we go into, essentially thinking about people and having a positive impact, but we're not having a full think about the impact on other parts and other people and other areas of a community, because there is no one community in any place. This captures it in an image. We're busy doing our own little bits of prevention, and we're not thinking about the whole thing. The elephant could be dropping dead on its feet, and we're still holding on to the tail, getting on with what we think is the right thing to be doing. So there's nothing new about place-based approaches, and we go back 10 years now. We've got the Christie Commission. It's 10 years on. Scottish Government are very strong about it's as relevant now as it ever was, and I think the place standard tool sits really well as a way of moving forward and continuing to apply the principles that were the recommendations by the Christie Commission. Obviously there's that link with people. That's an obvious one. It's a tool to go and speak to people, as Sandy was explaining. But there's the prevention aspect there is huge, because the elements that it talks about are those things that, as Sandy was saying, that we need to shape differently in a place to prevent people from becoming ill in the first place. Likewise, it also can prevent the carbon emissions that are damaging our planet in the first place as well. That's very much a preventative tool. It's thinking about not how do we treat things that are already happening and solve the problem. Let's get upstream here and think about how we prevent having to treat it in the first place. Given the range of questions that it talks about, then even if you're thinking about a local government setting, you have to work in partnership across different parts of council if you're actually going to address all of those areas and take something forward having used the tool. Otherwise, it's just a tool, gives you a pretty picture. There has to be a process here for working with those tools and taking that and bridging what a community are saying back up into a change, a system change, a policy change, or whatever in whatever organisations are influencing that place. And then there's the performance aspect that Sandy was referring to. You can go back 3 years later and talk to a community again and see what's changed. And hopefully it will. And if it hasn't, there's something wrong there, and there's an obvious link that you can see there's something wrong, because the reasons and the conversation, the rich conversations, will be saying the same thing. I've never known a consultation tool to be able to do that before. And there's an important aspect to highlight where we are coming out of COVID. The Social Renewal Advisory Board was set up to look at how do we come out of COVID and think about the people of Scotland. The report is called If Not Now, When? And they are very clear that all of the recommendations sit within thinking about place and all of these aspects of place, and that we still very strongly need to be thinking about the principles of the Christie Commission. So I think the tool has a really strong role as we move forward, and we are waiting on Scottish Government's fuller response to that after the elections today, but they've certainly been very supportive of wanting to take on board those recommendations. So it's a tool that's sitting there and ready to use as we move forward. It's a tool, again, that is sitting and ready to use as we apply the place principle that Sandy's already covered. It's been in place now, and it was really introduced to say, look, the Christie Commission is still important, and here's a reminder, we need to be working together and with communities, and that emphasis on communities stays strong, and I think that's where the place standard tool particularly helps. This image here is about having spent years in councils. I know I worked in the spatial planning aspect of a council, and now and then, you know, we'd sit there as a tin of new potatoes, and we might mix with transport, because that seemed good. We could new potatoes and tomatoes, that works. But did we go and speak to education? Well, that was peach halves. We weren't going to open up that tin and talk to them, because we didn't really understand how that could work together. The place standard tool, and what it does is it starts that conversation back into organisations to open up those tins, to get everybody involved in actually looking at what are the conversations of what a community is thinking about an area and how we can join together to address them. It is a person-centred approach in how we can use it. So where are we right now within Scotland? So prior to COVID hitting, we already had national outcomes. The tool is very good for delivering on that ask to be thinking about communities and to deliver on those outcomes. We also had a net zero emission targets changing every part of our lives, and so many of the aspects of it can also feed around those net zero emission targets as well. But then we had COVID that hit, which is, you know, we talk about prevention. It's been the biggest experience of a lifetime for most of us of prevention. Stay at home to prevent getting ill. I hope we can keep this idea of preventing ourselves from getting ill and carry it forward. It's certainly coming through as one example that I'll give you for how the place standard can be used. In the programme for government last year, Nicola Sturgeon in her introduction was really clear about how lockdown has improved lives for certain people, that they have more access and time and in their locality to use their active travel, to exercise, to use local shops. And all of that is shaped into this term, a 20-minute neighbourhood, where it enables people to live better, healthier lives, and at the same time is supporting our net zero ambitions. So there's an ambition there to keep this local living as something that we continue post-COVID and as part of our recovery from COVID. 20-minute neighbourhoods are a place-based approach. They are thinking about the neighbourhood in the round. This is an example on the left-hand side of what Melbourne are doing on a 20-minute neighbourhood approach, and they list all the aspects that they see as being important to deliver a 20-minute neighbourhood. You'll notice the main thing there is It isn't really about how far you can walk in 20 minutes. It's about living locally. It's just a fantastic term that people have caught into. But if you look at the actual topics that are the areas that they're saying, these are the features that you need to deliver local living that enables health of our people and our planet, then they map across really well with all of the areas that we are going to be having a conversation around with communities if we use the place standard tool. So looking at those place standard tool questions and looking at the fact that we have a 20-minute neighbourhood ambition and an ambition for more local living, and for thinking about how does a place actually impact on the health and well-being of people. The place and wellbeing outcomes have been developed by a consortium, a collaborative group of public health, Director of Public Health Scotland, COSLA, let me think now, heads of planning, a whole group of organisations came together and thought, you know, we need to really identify what are the things about a place that we need to deliver upon if we're actually going to turn around the horrific, really, health inequalities in Scotland. We have the worst health inequalities in the whole of Western Europe. The UK is the worst, and then we're the worst within the UK, and Sandy's highlighted those already. And what we pulled upon about what are the outcomes we want to achieve are really the outcomes that sit behind the questions that are in that place standard tool. They map across the same, but it's actually about we need to achieve better active travel for everybody who's walking, wheeling, cycling, that we have a better standard of that we achieve better upward use of public transport that fits with the upward hierarchy in the transport strategy. So there's a set of outcomes there being set out for these are the things that we need to deliver in the round in order to help our people to thrive and have successful places. We describe places as if they can be successful on their own. It's how people interact with them that makes them successful. Thus, people are right at the heart of it. And that's not just a by chance image of people. That is representing the fact that we have varying groups of people, and we need to consider all of them when we're using the place standard tool and when we're thinking about delivering place-based approaches and the place and well-being outcomes as well. Also, 20-minute neighbourhoods, the place principle, looking at our town centres coming out of COVID, all of these areas that focus in on place. We need to think about the different population groups. Straight across, very quick mapping there, I won't spend a lot of time on because you're very welcome to these slides afterwards, is moving around. That's the very first theme in the place standard tool. And it's about the behaviour change, that if we introduce interventions that we can be thinking about how does it impact on behaviour change. Well, we can improve walking and cycling infrastructure. That will mean that there's more physical activity, more social engagement. It actually impacts on all of the public health priorities, and it actually impacts on a consistent set of health outcomes, reducing the kinds of diseases that have moved on now from those that Sandy was highlighting. They were the ones that were caught because we lived too closely together in slums. The diseases we've got now are less likely, particularly when you get to mental well-being, to be the ones that you can go into hospital and get a cure for. A lot of them, the answer to them lies in preventing them happening in the first place and the environments that we live in. So just to close, a little bit about the local work that I've been doing, certainly using the place standard tool themes, those place and wellbeing outcomes, around looking at a small site in Ardrossan. But it was really saying, how is this site contributing to health and wellbeing? How is it contributing to our national outcomes? Of the whole town of Ardrossan when you're looking at putting in a community campus and a school. And we took it through an assessment of the place and wellbeing outcomes. We took it through an assessment of the national outcomes. And we also, very, very importantly, assessed each aspect of that place and what was being proposed for that new development against how would it impact on the different people that could be using that place and lived in that town. So we've called these rapid scoping assessments, but the document itself, the cover there, it's on the Improvement Service website under Place Programme. And if you want a little bit more of detail of how you can take the place standard tool, so what a community is telling you, and then take it into the working of a council and have a council officers, so that these assessments were done with council officers and Public Health Scotland experts, sitting down and having a conversation for 3 hours, long conversation, but it captures in one moment exactly what could be done to improve on a place in order to take account of what people think, what experts who are working in the area think, and pull it all together into a place-based approach. As we move forward then, as I said, I was referring to that if not now, when social renewal advisory report. There's a future here when we come to place-based approaches as we come out of COVID and we look to how we have, whether we call it a new normal or simply recovering from what we've all gone through. And I think there's a really big role in this for CLD. And I pull out that particular paragraph from the Standards Council description. And for me, particularly in the roles of CLD, when you look at the Place Standard tool, it's about that enabling you to build community capacity by having a conversation in the round about a place and about prevention, but it needs then a partnership approach up in order to ensure that what comes from the community can actually be addressed across different parts of councils and different organisations. So it gets that conversation going. It is just a tool though. There's a process that has to sit behind that takes those results and does the partnership working and reviews performance and gives things a go. An example is what I'm working on myself at the moment is a Shaping Places for Wellbeing programme that is just being worked up at the moment, where we will be looking at working with about 4 sites across Scotland to overall improve Scotland's wellbeing, reduce health inequality and improve at the same time the health of our planet, because we can do both. We shouldn't be doing one or the other. And I list there all the different aspects, all the national ambitions that we'll be feeding into. And the overall desire there is that places and lives have been improved through work with communities, collaboration across sectors and embedded system change around the delivery of those place and wellbeing outcomes. Now, when we go in to do this work, and there are many other organisations going in to do likewise work across Scotland as we come over as we get our new Scottish Government in the next few days, the role of SLD in that work with communities and the role of the Place Standard tool as a means of working with those communities will be at the fore. For ourselves, we have 2 key approaches, linking health and local government, but linking into a citizen-centred approach. And we'll be using the tool to do that. And we'll be looking specifically at sites for inequality, town centres as we come out of COVID, and those in areas of inequality may well suffer more than those that have got a well-heeled population who will be able to work from home and perhaps help their town centre. And we'll be looking for a geographic mix of sites of what we're doing. But that's really just one example. There are a lot of organisations stepping up now and being funded in order to do more around this. And I think there's a role for CLD and for the Place Standard tool in achieving that. Thanks very much. That's the Improvement Service website. As I say, if you have a look under the Place programme, there's a lot more information on the scoping sessions that we've done. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene, for that inspiring as ever and eloquent overview of the transformatory power of place-based working and that kind of stirring call to action about the relevance of the Place Standard tool, building community capacity. I've been following the chat as we've gone through. I haven't seen any questions come up. Just to reassure you, we will be sending on the slides and links afterwards. Has anybody got any burning questions just now, or shall we just put your hand up if you do? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next presentations. No, I think that shows that they've been really comprehensive. Now I'd like to move on to our case studies. First of all, I'm delighted that Anthea Coulter and Mary Fox have joined us. Anthea is the Chief Officer of Clackmannanshire Third Sector Interface, and Mary is Team Leader for Community Learning and Development at Clackmannanshire Council. And I've been working closely with Clackmannanshire over the last few years, so it's brilliant to have them here to give you an overview of what they've been doing in Clackmannanshire. So Anthea and Mary, over to you.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, Kat. Nicola, can you put the slides up, please?
Yes, they're just loading at the moment. You should be able to see them in a tick.
Too many photos, sorry.
Is that okay? Can
So
you
we've
see
been introduced, so I think we can move this one on. These are some of the partners. So our focus today is mainly on Alloa. And for those of you, could you do the next, sorry, that's the next slide. For those of you who don't know about Alloa, it's central Scotland. We're on the north side of the River Forth. It's a population of around 20,000, the largest town in Clackmannanshire. We have a very strong Jacobean history with the Earls of Mar, but also an industrial heritage, former harbour, fishing, boat building, coal mining. We still have a glassworks, but we don't have textiles and wool anymore, and we still have a brewing industry as well. But we have seen a decline in most of those industries, and that has created health and social care issues. The town centre suffers from the same sort of issues that many similar-sized towns in the central Scotland have experienced. We first used the Place Standard tool. I'm sorry, it's not actually moving forward, Nicola. Can you move it? Oh, there we are. Sorry. We first used the Place Standard tool back in 2018. I was working within the Community Justice Partnership, and the tool was carried out with people who touched on the criminal justice system in some way. So that was victims, perpetrators, those at risk of offending. It created a wealth of information, actually, and we realised the power of it. In particular, in this case, it was a community of interest, and it highlighted three things for them in particular, and you'll see that on the screen, that the people within this community of interest didn't feel safe, issues around work and local economy, and also felt they had lost their influence and sense of control. The next time we moved on, having carried out this research with the local community partnership, we're keen to expand the work. Again, I'm not getting it moving, Nicola. Could you do the next slide? Sorry, there's one missing. Yes, that's right. As a TSI, we work within the Health and Social Care Partnership. We're supporting local development trusts within communities and aligning our outcomes with the local outcome improvement plans. And in some cases, also the locality plans. In this case, we're focusing in particular on our locality plan, which is Alloa South and East, where we have been multiple levels of deprivation over a number of years. And we hope by using the tool across both geographic areas and also community of interest, we could help shape future planning for our communities. Alongside that, we had the local business improvement district, Alloa First, was just going through its process of being voted in again. And so we decided to focus on Alloa Town Centre and align with their new start of their new 5-year period. Fortuitous, it's also dovetailed with other developments in our area, and namely this is housing development on Primrose Street, which is right in the middle of town. The next slide will show it. It was a key site that was a former cooperative store in the middle of town. It's right where the car park is shown. The council wished to sell it to Kingdom Housing Association to deliver affordable housing. The building right next to it is called the Spear Centre. It's our library and registrar. So we're really right in the middle of town here. And alongside that, Architecture and Design Scotland were developing for their new Caring Places initiative, which was looking at smart and innovative solutions to, come on, move along. There we are. That was looking at smart and innovative solutions to make town centre living places for older people and older generations where they could access services in a safe and convenient way. At the same time, Clacks Council is facing significant challenges. It's a very smallest local authority, but it's got the highest number of older people per population of a local authority, obviously shrinking budgets in there, and challenges of delivering care in the community based on conventional formal models. So the key aim was to allow older people to move into more suitable modern accommodation that can meet their future needs. And by doing so, free up larger housing. And alongside this was identified the need to be dementia friendly in the process as well. And this is the picture of the housing. It's quite bulky. It's 65 units right in the middle of the town centre. So it's going to be very key that we ensure that we look after these older people within the community. The first part of this process was actually talking to stakeholders, and this is really interesting. So this was people who, part of the Housing Association, council, health and social care, business leaders, all took part in a stakeholders exercise using the Place Standard tool. And I particularly, you can see it's quite an old version. I think it was before it was even published, actually. I want you to draw attention to things that the people who were the stakeholders felt were the issues that they had and challenges they felt with this site. You'll see right at the top, one of the areas they thought was a problem was moving around. Over to the right, the orange is natural spaces, and down at the bottom, the blue section is housing community. So these were the areas that they thought, hold on to that thought, because I'll be coming back to it in a minute. As you can tell, there was also comments made at the time. The next part of this exercise, having done the vulnerable groups, the stakeholders group, was actually then starting to look at the local residents themselves. So we got really involved, and I'm sorry, this is not moving on. There we are. We did this really by a number of ways. We looked at older residents, older people in the areas, neighbouring areas, and also the Hillfoots we got involved in as well. We put the tool into practice in a number of different ways. Obviously, they've explained, Sandy's explained, it can be used in a digital way, and we did use that as well. But we found also that we needed to do, we also found that we wanted more information, and we felt that was a bit limited at that point with the what was offered. So we developed a slightly more robust demographic information and analysis from it. So we wanted to look at age. We wanted to look at people who lived in the town centre itself. We wanted to see if people had a disability or were caring for somebody. We wanted to draw out those different cohort priorities and cross-examine them to see the commonalities in particular. So we put together our own demographic survey, and we did in a paper form and also via SurveyMonkey that went alongside the tool. In order that we made it as accessible as possible as well and as easy to use, we also adapted a smaller version, and you can see it here in the photo. It was just an A5 folded leaflet, but the beauty of it was it could be put in places like hairdressers and barbers. One of the biggest successes we had was Weatherstone's breakfast. We went in the morning, and loads and loads of people filled it in. We're very happy to. So we did drop-ins, we did one-to-one meetings, and we did focus groups. And as I say, we did that digital and non-digital version. We found in total, we had 268 people in total took part in the first stage of the analysis. And this is where I want you to remember back to what the stakeholders said. The things that they were concerned about was moving around. Moving around is not an issue for local residents. They were happy. Likewise, natural spaces to the right. Stakeholders thought that was an issue, but actually people didn't feel that was an issue. They felt there was lots of lovely green spaces around the town centre. And also housing and community at the bottom, again, complete opposite to what the stakeholders, they're saying that they felt that was strong. So it's interesting how stakeholders and residents had very different views, and that really helped form and allow the work to focus on the things that they felt there were challenges. And these are work and local economy, feeling safe, influence and sense of control, and care and maintenance were the things that people highlighted. And that's then informed how, and these are some of the comments, sorry, I'll just put the next slide up. These are some of the comments that also came out. That's the beauty of the Place Standard tool. You've got that quantitative aspect, but you've also the qualitative one. And don't feel safe after dark, town centre not appealing, feeling that not enough has been done about the local history. That was a really interesting one that was taken up. This allowed us to inform on plans, both for the Primrose Street development, but also the Scotland's Town Fund, which is a large capital fund that's come in to local authorities to invest in town centres, and it is going to be used in Alloa. Also, how do the business community meet the priorities of customers and visitors? And how do the third sector and communities enable to create a caring, connected community better? And this actually happened in a number of ways. So these are things that actually happened because of the results of the Place Standard tool. So number one, the Business Improvement District invested heavily in CCTV cameras, and they've been widely used by Police Scotland, and there's been a significant reduction in crime in the town centre. So immediate impact and investment in that. the Scotland's Town Partnership is actually, the money is now being used quite specifically on particular things that are going to make the town feel safer and better connected. So there's a narrow corridor going from a car park through to the town centre that's going to be opened up. Links to the college and socialising areas are going to be improved. There's an investment in a new active travel hub, which was the former toilets, and actually there's going to be a new changing places and disabled toilet in there too. And that's going to house the Clackmannanshire Tapestries, which is a set of beautiful tapestries been designed by Andrew Crummey, which show the heritage of the area. The Business Improvement District also invested in this local heroes kind of advertising. They picked lots of different people, young and older people, and had them banners up around the town centre. Dementia and age friendly, we really focused on this a lot more. So now we've got 2 centres that are opening up in the town centre. Alzheimer's Scotland are bringing their new centre, and we've got Give a Dog a Bone, which is another charity, opening up. And we're also working with Our Connected Communities, which is part of the University of Stirling, to help improve the dementia friendly aspect of the town centre. And then in terms of the overlooked care and maintenance of the town, there's a new Alloa and Bloom group. We've got new planters that have been brought in. A social enterprise called All Cleaned Up, which is part of Apex, has come in and is helping. And that goes right back to that first place standard tool about creating jobs and volunteering opportunities for people with significant barriers. So these are things that have actually happened as a result. A few months into this project, one of the community development workers for Alloa South and East, along with Mary as team leader, approached CTSI, planning to use the Place Standard tool to shape the next local action plan for the Beaumar area. And the Beaumar area is the bit that's marked in red. This is the whole of Alloa South and East. And the black area is the town centre. So you can see there's an overlap there. So with the town centre research acting as a starting point, it was a natural progression to then look at the next area. I'm going to hand over to Mary now.
Okay, thanks, Anthea. I'll take over from here.
Yep.
As Anthea mentioned, we had an action plan that had been developed in 2016 where a small section, it's the largest area in Alloa South East, but and that's the Beaumar area. But Alloa South East takes in other local communities that surround the town centre. So we decided at that point that we would look wider than just one geographical area, but we would look at the whole Alloa South East area. So working with CTSI and other partners, we started the Place Standard process. And you're right, it is an assessment tool. And we found out quite quickly that it was an assessment tool because although we were using focus groups, one-to-one, online digital, and we left the A5 leaflet, as Anthea had mentioned there, in local community centres and shops as well, it didn't allow us for that conversation. So once the results had come in and the responses had come in, we had a couple of community events, one in October in 2019, then again in January 2020, to actually start speaking to the community. We went back to focus groups to try and dig a bit deeper as to what actions they would like to see. And you see the diagram there about the kind of results, and moving around was not a big issue, but actually getting involved, influencing what was happening in the local community was a big thing that came out of the area. Working local economy and play and recreation. So it was, what did that look like? These are big headings, but what actually did you want to dig into and get down to the grassroots as to what the community wanted to see happening? So I'm just going to thank you. So these were the main headings. What we had agreed with the representatives was that we would group them into groups before we came up with some of the key actions. And some of the key actions that came from that were, if I can find them, there you go, there's some of their comments. But the actions that they were wanting to upgrade a local community centre, which was a 1970s building, and although it was started, it kind of lost its community feel for a while. It was lying empty, but it grew. There was things happening in that community and things were moving, but they wanted to reinvest in it. So we were successful in a bid for the Regenerational Capital Fund for the Scottish Government. And as we're speaking, well, not today, there's an election happening today, sorry. It's a polling station as well. But moving forward in the next few weeks, the contractors will be in and it'll be getting a new roof. It'll become a digital hub. It'll become an SQA centre, so we can start looking at skills and development in the area. So that was one of the key areas. that they had wanted to look at. They wanted to support a local community group. CTSI were supporting them as well to get a lease. So they've taken over a piece of land in this community, and they're going to be developing a local park and gardens and developing the environment there. They're also making links with other community organisations. So we're starting to really join the dots here in this community. We were planning to launch the new action plan for Alloa South East in September last year, but obviously COVID hit. So we've had to kind of look at how we continue that engagement and keep the stakeholders involved. We've had online meetings, and I must admit the community are saying we don't want to do online meetings. I think they found the whole digital thing with their schools and their kids was a bit kind of throwing them away. So we're planning walks and talks and community conversations, and as venues start to open up, we will be meeting up with them again. But we have also set up a Facebook page in the last few weeks so that they're informed of what's happening. I don't know what people did. We were really conscious that people might have thought, we've done this consultation, we've had focus groups, we've had discussions, so where's it going? But what we did do is we followed up before we had our first open meeting, and we've done a quick sample survey. We put it online through social media and asked the community to respond, and it was about the impact of COVID that I'd had on them and the recovery from COVID, and were these the same priorities that they had identified in the plan a year ago? Were they still the same? Predominantly they were the same, but one of the big things that have came out through the COVID experience was health and well-being, and then there's also the employment training and skills. There's a big concern about that because there's been a number of families being furloughed like everybody else in the country, so we're having to realign some of the actions to their responses and that recent results. And I think that's where we're at the moment. Sorry, that was a quick whistle. I'm very conscious of the time. We had 10 minutes, so I'm trying to fit it in.
Thank you, Nicola and Anthea. It's true, our timings have gone way out of the window, but there's been so much learning and interesting information coming out of your presentation.
Sorry, I was just going to finish off.
Oh, sorry. Oh,
sorry, can I just put the last
carry
slide
on?
Up, because it's
I'll
just
mute myself.
I think the next steps for us is definitely using the place standard 2 more. It will be able to judge the business improvement district in particular, and as they progress through their 5-year period. And Alva, which is another Hillfoots town, has used the tool back in 2019 to look at regeneration, and they're now going back and using it with younger people because they're wanting to see it's creating it's the very last slide. They're looking at creating this intergenerational housing, and that's on the screen there. So the place standard tools demonstrated, I think, in a very short space of time that some easy adaptations proved we can use it as a universal tool. It was allowed organisations, sectors who usually work autonomously on single issues can come together in partnership and enabled common consultation. It opened a door for more collaboration, as we've seen with the expansion of the project into Alloa South and East, and it allowed us to better understand the priorities of people in the community, and that's going to inform community planning, ensuring planning reflects actual need and has been adopted. It helps prioritise, I think, in particular where resources are scarce and what could be spent on that's going to make that more impact for people and what they've highlighted, and a mechanism for communities to feel more involved. And that, I think, that influence and sense of control that came through every single one, I think, has been enabled more than anything, actually. And just that, as say Mary's described, starts the conversation. And I think it, particularly from a third sector point of view, will be able for us to measure and evaluate in the future. Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anthea. I'm glad you interrupted me because I think you finished on some really important points. I am aware of time, so I'll just move on to the next presentation. Linda Warwick and Heather Davidson from South Ayrshire Council are going to talk about their experiences of using the place standard there, and keep chatting in the background. We'll see what we can do with questions at the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Kat. I'm Linda Warwick. I'm Community Coordinator for South Ayrshire Council. I've got responsibility for, among other things, community engagement and community safety. And Heather Davidson, who is one of our community safety officers, is going to do probably the more important second part of the presentation. So I'm going to give a sort of overview of how we got to the point where we were using Place Standard Toolkit and the work that we were doing with communities, and Heather will give a wee bit more detail on how that's been taken forward with a specific group within a local area. Can you move on to the next slide? Thanks. So, as I've mentioned here, place plan and thematic review, these two things came together into sort of the perfect storm during 2019. So I should say that all of this activity, or most of this activity, happened in 2019. So South Ayrshire Council were looking to take forward a place planning approach, and at the same time we were also looking at a thematic review of service delivery across quite a few services, which would bring together staff from our CLD teams, community safety, community engagement, employability and skills, and health and wellbeing teams. And the proposal round about that thematic review was to take a more locality-based approach to working with local communities, and with one of the aims being to support and coordinate the delivery of local place plans. So before these two things came together, Irene actually came down to South Ayrshire and did a workshop with staff who were going to be involved in the thematic review and the place planning approach. So we had a kind of overview of Place Standard Toolkit. It's probably worth saying, I think from a community safety point of view, we were really well aware of the impact of place and how people perceive the area that they live in on their individual lives and as a community. So the Place Standard Toolkit was an ideal way for us to sort of then develop a lot of that work and take it forward with communities. So it was agreed then to use the Place Standard Toolkit to take this work forward and to use it as a way of developing local place plans. We'd already done a bit of work in previous years with a few communities across South Ayrshire using the charrette process, so there were place plans in place for some areas. However, we decided to focus on two key areas, which were the two areas which were identified within our local outcomes improvement plan as areas that we wanted to develop local plans, and there were areas which were experiencing poorer outcomes. Heather is going to focus on a bit of work which happened in Ayr North, but I'm just aware that Alison Wales, who's our CLD team leader for the Girvan area, is also in this call. So although Heather's going to concentrate in Ayr North, a lot of the same work was happening in the Girvan area, and not to put Alison in the spot, but if there's any questions specifically about that, I'm sure she'll be able to pitch in later. So the first thing we did was undertook a series of workshops with staff around the use of the Place Standard Toolkit, how we would use it, what it was for, all the stuff that Irene kind of went through earlier on. And for us, this was a really good process because it helped staff from the teams who were coming together within the thematic review to get to know each other. So it was a bit of sort of team building and development, but at the same time it provided a focus for them to start working together and other Place Standard Toolkit within communities. So although the actual service review hadn't happened, it was a good tool for us to get staff to actually start working together and identifying groups within the community that they would want to work with. We focused in the communities initially with groups where there was a relationship already in place, and we already had a working relationship established with local community groups. But at the same time, as was mentioned in the previous presentations, there was an online, the Place Standard Toolkit was put online, and we also did a few development sessions with staff of the council who lived in those local areas, so we were getting another sort of feedback from another group on the area. The Place Standard Toolkit was delivered or started really over the summer of 2019 and was completed over the latter part of 2019. It allowed different staff from the services that we'd outlined above to take the lead in the process. Obviously, employability and skills would have key working relationships with certain groups, where community safety might take the lead in another focus group or another workshop. And it allowed us to adapt the model for every group that we're working with. So just as an example, we already had a really good working relationship with a primary school in Ayr North where we'd done quite a lot of work around about environmental visual audits, and the kids in the school were already used to sort of looking at their area, identifying the things that they really liked about their area, because I think that's quite important. I think we can go in as workers and sort of be very aware that the sort of place that people live can have a detrimental effect on the quality of life and their experience of living in that area, but also there are lots of things in an area that people really like, and I think that the work that we did with the kids through the environmental visual audit put that to life. So we did follow-up work with them round about the Place Standard Toolkit, and really we had to adapt the Place Standard Toolkit for them to be able to access it and engage with it a bit more fully. So I'm not sure if there's anybody on this call who's old enough to remember Runaround, which Mike Smith, I think, was the presenter at the time. So really what we did was the different parts of the Place Standard Toolkit. We had the numbers up outside in the playground, talked through with the kids what all the numbers went, and then when we went through all the questions, they basically ran to the number which corresponded to how they felt about the question that we were asking them. So it was quite interactive, but allowed them to sort of engage in the process a bit more than maybe a sort of workshop where we were sitting with the Place Standard Toolkit in front of them would. So all of that information was all sort of pulled together, and really the key bit for us was really about the conversation. I think that was picked up earlier, and really that was paramount, about having conversations with people about where they lived, how they felt about that, and just focusing on the work that we did with the primary school. We'd also done a wee bit of work with them previously in partnership with a local sheltered housing complex. So the plan, which is still the plan, we just couldn't sort of follow it up with COVID, was to get both of those groups together and look at the results from the Place Standard Toolkit and see where the things correlated that both groups kind of felt the same about, and where there were differences, so that we could kind of see how we could take work forward with them. So in terms of the results, before we actually pulled all that and started working on developing locality plans, we wanted to make sure that we were validating the results a bit more widely. So we did have a few participatory budgeting events, which people know you usually get quite a good response to, and wider members of the community usually attend. So we took the opportunity for some of those events in early 2020 to use that a way of validating the results that had come back from the Place Standard Toolkit with wider community, and also that led to further discussion with people who might not have been involved in the original process. And this information was the information that we pulled together altogether was then developed to use to develop plans for Governing in Ayr North, which are out sort of at the moment for final comment. And probably fair to say that once we get the thematic review structure sorted with all the teams coming together, they'll be the teams who will help support communities to take this work forward. And having used the Place Standard Toolkit in both those areas, I think we've sort of established quite a good framework and set of skills and experience among staff to be able to take it forward in other areas. So that is really how we got to take the Place Standard Toolkit forward, but I'm just going to pass on to Heather now to talk in a wee bit more detail about how really we used the model and probably adapted it as our working relationship developed with a couple of groups within the Ayr North area.
Thank you, Linda. As Linda said there, one of the established groups initially used was the Ayr North Exclusively Women's Group. That's a group that I run in partnership with my colleague Sammy from CLD. I'm going to briefly share with you today some of the ways in which we've used the Place Standard to develop work with that group in particular. We took the opportunity to do the place planning exercise with the group when we had them away in their end of programme residential weekend at Ballacadee campsite in Newton Stewart. As you can see from the pictures there, we were really fortunate. I think it was the hottest day of the year. We were in a beautiful setting and we had a full afternoon in-depth conversation with the women about their area and how they feel about it. The information that was collated was passed back as part of the wider consultation. However, one of the advantages of the place standard model is the level of discussion that it opens up in each topic, and within this there were common issues and concerns and ideas raised across all of the topics, which highlighted areas that we could actually make a start in working towards already. So these were a lack of community pride, social isolation, health issues, both physical and mental health issues. There was a common interest in history. I think that was mentioned earlier on as well in Alaba. And a lot of talk about forgotten times gone by when the community wasn't so bad. Sammy and I looked at these issues and ways of addressing them, and we came up with a proposed new project. Next slide, please. Which will be there. So we took all the keywords from the place plan discussions with the women. They had mentioned things like the keywords were environment, creative, resilience, investigating, belonging, knowledge, and we incorporated it with this idea of the past and the present being linked. We set up the poster, we put it out on social media, and we invited people along to a consultation to see if there was a need and interest for this type of group, and if so, what would this group do? We had 9 attend the initial consultation, and they decided that they wanted to focus on health and history. They wanted to socialise, they wanted to share stories, they wanted to go out for walks round about their community, reporting environmental issues that came up, but also highlighting any good aspects of their community, like clean streets and gardens that were well kept. The group began meeting weekly, and they started walking to the local library in Ayr and researching with the history department there and tying in with them the history of Ayr North, with the hope of showcasing at a wider community event and the hope of increasing pride and knowledge in the Ayr North area. So that work is ongoing. Next slide, please. So because of the success of using the place standard toolkit, when it came to programme planning for the women's group, which we do every 3 months, we allow them to evaluate previous sessions and also shape their programme going forward. We decided to change it this time, just to keep it interesting for the women, but also to incorporate the place standard again, because of the wealth of information and the good discussions that it brings about. We adapted the toolkit, and we put in the topics listed there in the table into the toolkit as the headings, and we used previous themes and questions within the toolkit with a view to use the group discussion to form the programme going forward, and individual results on the sheets to develop personal development plans for each of the women going forward. At this session, the topics scoring the lowest were safety, health and wellbeing, and finance. So we used that to formulate the programme going forward with women's aid inputs, police input, mental health, and financial advice. Experiences and memories and confidence scored highly, which we expected because they're a fundamental part of the programme and they had been the focus of earlier sessions. The women found this way of consulting them about the programme really helpful because they were familiar with the process. It was easy, it was straightforward, but also because it opened up the conversation. They also liked the visual, the fact that they could look at the chart and see how their programme would look on the day of their consultation, going away knowing what it would be focusing on. And also the individual scoring gave us that opportunity to create the personal development plans for the women, work with them out with the group as well and signpost where necessary. Next slide, please. Again, so back to the Ayr North Time team, it had now been running for maybe 4 months, and we decided it was time to review that group because the scope was quite wide that it was covering. And again, we used a version of the place standard model to generate discussions about the progression of the group. So
Heather, sorry to interrupt. I'm just realising the time. I've also realised that Helen Martin told me that she had to leave at 2:15. So I'm just checking because Helen is the next presentation. Helen, are you still there? Or have you gone?
No, I'm still here at the moment. I've got a colleague covering for me for the next 10 minutes. And
brilliant, thank you so much. Heather, sorry.
That's okay.
If you don't mind just wrapping up quite quickly, this is really fascinating, and we'll share the slides afterwards so people can come back with more questions. Thank you.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Helen.
We used the place standard again just to review the programme so far, and the topics are there. And on the next slides, we actually put it into a Wordle because we're very proud of the Time Teams logo. So we used this to action plan, the top diagram showing where they felt that were strong just now, the bigger words, and the bottom diagram being the action plan, what they wanted to focus on. Next slide, please. So just this last slide actually just shows us last week with the two groups when we were allowed to go back out and meet in person again. And this was us back to the original consultation, the original placemaking for Ayr North. And this is us at the consultation stage just before the plan's made. So just to show that the work is actually ongoing. And that's me. I don't know if Linda, if you want to say anything.
No, just to wrap up, as Heather said, the work is still ongoing. We've got the sort of more strategic action plans, but I think it's been really useful in the work that Heather and Sammy have done with the group in Ayr North to understand how we can keep that process and the dialogue ongoing and help groups to sort of identify their own priorities and how they might then develop their group from there.
Thank you. Sorry to rush you both. That was really, really interesting. Again, that theme about how the place standard can open that conversation, and then how you took that engagement and start to drill down into individual actions and developing groups capacities. I'm going to hand straight over to Helen Martin and her colleague Anne from Glasgow University. Apologies for the timing, but we're really looking forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, thanks very much. Hi, and as Kat says, I'm Helen Martin, and I teach in the Community Development Programme up at the University of Glasgow, and my colleague Anne McGreekin. So today, the next 10 minutes, you're going to hear our dulcet tones and our experience of the PST. Can I have next slide, please, if it's going to go? So as part of the undergrad BA Honours in Community Development, every year our students spend 450 hours of community development practice in the field, and as part of that kind of getting to know and engaging with the community, we use a different model each year. So in first year, students will be introduced to using the asset-based community development approach as the means of gathering information and analysis of the community in the context that they're working in. Year 2, our students use the community capitals framework as that part of that engagement, and then in year 3, our students are engaged in using the PST as a means of engagement and analysis and understanding of the context that they're working in. Next slide, please. So we've been probably using the PST with the students in third year for the last 3 years. And each year, is all programmes, we kind of review what we're doing and how we do that. Speaking to some other folk, we decided that a way forward and kind of gather some information about the use of the PST with the students is we undertook a recent research project with a number of our graduates. We got ethical approval from the university. We engaged in a series of focus groups with our graduates, one-to-one interviews and semi-structured interviews with them as well in terms of gathering information. And what we were trying to draw out from their experience was what was the positives, what were some of the challenges, adaptations and actions that come out of their hours that they spent in the field using the PST. So the next couple of slides is going to kind of talk a wee bit about that. And some of the challenges that the students faced whilst out in the community was that, and some of the things that they spoke about was that we have to be careful because sometimes it could be viewed, the PST in itself could be used as a kind of tick box exercise. A bit of a numbers game, if you like. Numbers can become a bit meaningless if used in a really huge, large-scale engagement, because when you put it together, it's the middle ground and you lose some of the minutiae of some of those conversations. And some of the students were saying that for them it felt like it could be used as just being another form of consultation, and that's the danger of that is when you don't go back and feed back to the people that have took the time to engage in the process with you. And one of the other challenges was around going to the usual suspects, that we have to be much more aware of trying to engage the wider community. And I think we've heard some fantastic examples of how that's been really great and it came for some really good results. Some of the other things that students were saying, or graduates were saying, it could be justification for resource spend. So it justifies why we're doing that and not that. And there needs to be a bit of a careful thinking around that. I suppose the implementation of the plan, of the action plan, it's about being clear about your intention when you were using the PST. What is the purpose of the PST? And hoping that when actions arise, that they're followed through. And I think one of the biggest things that the graduates, when looking back, was about getting community buy-in. And that this was going to be something that was going to be beneficial and that they themselves had a voice in. So they were some of the challenges that the students and others had faced when thinking about this. But the other side of that was, what were the things that were really positive and what were the things that they gained out of that? And for them, it was it's a fantastic tool for getting people talking. And it identifies the assets in communities as well. So as well as, some of the areas that needs some consideration, it identified the absolute treasures that were there in communities, and that there's a feel-good factor in that. That the headers, the prompt questions were good introductions to discussions. And it got people thinking more broadly about their community. When you look at those 14 areas, there's some aspects of that you would have less information or knowledge around. So this encouraged much more deeper conversations and broader conversations. And as we've seen earlier, it can lead, when it's used well, can lead to really positive outcomes for the participants, the students, and also for the community itself. And it's also, I think, what's really important for us is that it holds others to account. So in that analysis, when you see there is a low score, that actually who are the stakeholders, the power brokers that have a responsibility for those particular areas, and it enables, communities to kind of ask questions of those people in that position. Next slide, please. And you're going to take over.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Okay, so we're just going to give two very quick examples of where the Place Standard tool was adapted. So this particular one, the student was on placement in a primary school in the East End of Glasgow. So it was an area that was seen an area of multiple deprivation. So she worked with primary school 7 children who would be seen as the disruptive children at risk of exclusion. So she had this group that she was working with. At first, she started off using the booklet. She gave them that, thought that might be interesting for them to kind of look through and work on, but they weren't interested. But she really wanted to do she wanted to hear their voice and hear and understand what they thought of their community. So they started to go on walks. She took them outside the school and they walked about, which that wasn't without its challenges either. It was good. But as well as being at risk of exclusion for school, some of these young people were excluded from community spaces, the shops, and, people would kind of look on them as if, what you're doing here, the troublemakers. Next step was she hired some bikes from the local bike project. So that meant that they could go wider, than they cycled about the wider area. And as well as, they'd done this over a number of weeks, so it really built relationship between the student and the young people. They began to notice different things about their community. They began to speak up about it. They noticed that as they went into the park, at one end of the community, there was some beautiful flowers and lights and all the rest of it. For their end of the community, there was a rusty gate and it was down an alley. They began to speak about things like that. This place was, there was litter here, but there was lots of bins at that end. They began to question and challenge. She invited the parents and carers in. Again, relationship was key there. It took some time to get to know the parents and for them to view her not as a teacher, not as a person of authority, but just as, as somebody they could relate to. So coffee mornings and that kind of thing. And they then began to have their say on what they thought of their community. The final part, and this was at the prompt, and the young people was inviting the school teachers to take part. And the diagram that you see in front of you was a kind of result, you know, the different colours were the different, you know, groups who were represented. The young people really took issue with the fact that the school teachers scored their community so low. And that led to a conversation, a dialogue, a meaningful conversation, which was really helpful. Can we move on to the next one? Please, thank you. So the next group, that was a student who was working with a group of adults with additional support needs. Immediately, the booklet was unsuitable. So they sat down and they spoke about what would work, and they redesigned it. They used this game. So using the image that is on the PST, but in game form. So they had dice, and the dice, you know, certain numbers corresponded to areas on the, you know, headings on the tool. And they didn't use numbers to score, but they had discussion around it. You know, they used chance cards, and the chance cards were questions that would, you know, just kind of general questions about their community. So out of that, the student, you know, picked up in three, it was where their passion was, what got them motivated, what were they really talking about. So these 3 key points, and they, you know, took action in that. So we don't really have time to get into the 3 key points and what was done, but the students felt that their voice was, the participants felt their voice was heard, and she really emphasised, like, this is a unique piece of work. You folk, you know, your voices have been heard this time, and how you feel about it will never be replicated. So there were 3 things that came out of that that they took action on. Can we move on to the next slide, please? So all this, you know, as well as working with the students on the degree programme, we also work in communities in the Activate programme, and this is what we're going to, you know, we're going to be taking it further through that. So the Activate programme is an introduction to community development for local activists, people living and working in communities who've not had the formal education, the opportunity for that. So it kind of covers the key concepts and theories of community development, very participatory, and community engagement and investigation is a part of that course. So I think that the driver for the Activate Plus, which is what we are kind of looking to use, where we're looking to use the PST, the driver for that was to develop a kind of deeper dive, a deeper understanding into the root causes of some of the inequalities that were, you know, that are present in our communities, and finding ways to address these. So the PST, we felt, offered the opportunity for the participants to engage the wider community in these issues. So training and experience using the PST would be offered, meaning that the students, the participants in the course themselves, they would be the ones who would carry out the engagement. You know, so it wouldn't rely on the experts coming in, they would be the ones who would do it. The role of the tutor in this would just to be support them to help develop their engagement plan and to help them take forward the action planning and bringing the stakeholders into the room and finding a way to take action. So that's been a very brief kind of overview of what we've done. Helen, can I just hand back to you for the final comment on that? Oh, Helen's leaving, sorry. She's had to go. So really, I think just the thing that we wanted to say was that the interconnectedness of the academic, the educational and the practical application of the tool is what we would be hoping to achieve. And it enhances the students' learning, but it also gives voice to the community and allows them to be the ones who are hearing what's been said and taking action on it. So I'm just going to leave it there. Helen might have put it a bit more succinctly, but I think we're just slightly over time. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne, and please pass on our thanks to Helen as well. I think you wrapped it up beautifully, and it's really valuable for us to hear your academic and kind of evaluation perspective on it all. I was just going to say we have the ability to continue on a little bit longer if anybody wants to continue the conversation. I know some of you've got to go. It just shows that we needed to program longer time because we have so much inspirational stories really from the case studies that we've heard today and from Sandy and Irene when they introduced it as well. And it really goes to show the power of the Play Standard tool as a way of opening conversations. But what also came out across the three presentations, as Laura pointed out in the chat, is just the different way that the tool can be adapted to suit the needs of the population while retaining that holistic overview of a place and as a conversation starter that can then be taken forward with the community developed action plans or to work on individual issues. I think you've really eloquently described that for us. So thank you all. Of those that are left, I think there's still about 25 of us. Does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Just put your hand up.
Hi, Kat. It's Nicola.
Hi, Nicola.
Hi. I can see in the chat bar we have Gus asking, and I think this is probably to the presenters as well, do you find the Play Standard links in well with the National Standards community engagement? So it'd be super if somebody would be willing to respond to that.
Yep, that's my question. Hello.
Hi, Gus. Thank you. We've worked very closely with it's gone right out of my head, the organisation that produced the national standards for community engagement, and we very much see them as being critical to the application of the tool. The tool is a set of questions really that gives you that framework, but it is about the quality of engagement, about identifying who your community are and the best way to reach them. SCDC, that's it. I'm not always very good at remembering initials, but yeah, we have worked very closely and continue to work very closely with SCDC. Do any of the case studies want to give their perspective? Did you use it in your planning and delivery? Linda, I see your hands up.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that the community engagement processes are fundamental to the work that we're doing, and the Play Standard toolkit is just one toolkit in the armoury of the things that you can use when you're engaging with communities. So I suppose, yeah, I would say that it is very compatible. It's just the same as any other toolkit that you might use, and make sure that it's relevant to your audience, which is obviously fundamental to how you would take forward the community engagement principles.
Thank you, Linda. I think Gus also asked about timescales. Change can take time, and Gus, you asked how do you keep the community engaged or motivated from the time where you have those initial conversations? If he's still there, if anyone.
Yeah, sorry, I'm still here. God, that was ages ago.
I made a note of it because I thought it was very important.
Obviously, I've got a community development background myself, and you know, it's I'm going to be controversial now. I don't like the word Play Standard. I don't know what it is. It doesn't make me want to sit up and jump. But having said that, it sounds great. You know, I really like the simple questions and the themes and the clear outcomes and stuff like that. So yeah, it looks really good. I know we're using it locally in Dumfries and Galloway a bit, but I've never used it personally. So
You can start now.
That's it.
Anthea or Linda, have you any perspectives on that? About how you maintain that engagement? Or
yeah, I mean, I think, oh, sorry, I was just going to say, I think Heather covered some of that in her presentation, and that from our point of view, the Play Standard toolkit was the point was obviously to sort of put together an action plan for a local area, but there were quite clearly things in there that could be taken forward before that action plan was developed, and I think that's where it's really good to keep communities engaged, because they can be involved in taking some of those actions forward until you actually get to the overall action plan, which maybe is a wee bit more strategic. Yeah, I think that was that Heather and Sammy certainly picked up at an early stage, rather than wait until the plan's actually been written to start. You can make a start right away, because people are actually identifying these as areas of concern or areas that they really like about their local community.
I would just like to agree with that. It wasn't a case of doing the consultation or using that as an assessment tool, and then you had the conversations. Things were being implemented as we were going along before we even written the plan. So the local community recognised there was things they could take on board there and then. So it was a continuous engagement process. It wasn't a kind of, you do it and then 6 months later you're coming back and feeding back. You were in there, you were getting involved, and things were moving as we were going through the process. So, yeah.
And you had your hand up too.
Yeah, I think what we were hearing for the students was absolutely that where the relationship was there and you had regular meetings, it was great, you know, because the participants then they were active in shaping the plan. The problem was with the bigger organisations when it was a large scale, so councils, housing associations, where it was people didn't feel really engaged in the process. And that was much more difficult to keep them interested and motivated. There were also examples of, and this was a big council, a community planning area, they had a prize draw where you could win quite a lot of money or vouchers or whatever. And there was also another smaller, very small organisation, and they offered weekly bingo sessions, and at the interval of the bingo sessions, they spoke about, you know, the place standards. So I think it is just about where the worker is very involved with the people. They will listen and try and do things that'll work. When it's a bigger organisation, I'm not absolutely no suggesting the housing association or the council didn't listen, but there was less emphasis on getting, you know, drawing people in.
Yeah.
Just to add, I mean, we'll see whether it works for us. We're actually the active travel hub that is being currently developed at the moment, using the Scotland's Town Fund, is going to be a BENCOM. It's going to be a community benefit society. So that's taking that, actually making that ownership. You know, you can own this, you can have a part of this. And I'm really hoping it'll pay off. That journey that we've come on will actually, people will go, well, actually, okay, I said that was what I wanted. And these are sort of things that I wanted to improve. So I'll put my money where my mouth is. So I'll actually buy a share and I'll take a part in it. That's the dream. Fingers crossed. I'll watch the space later this year.
One thing that's really struck me listening to all of your examples is that the value of that collaboration between organisations and communities. So even where it is a large organisation like a local authority or a housing association, there are different partners who can do some of that continued engagement over time. So it doesn't just go away into an office for the cogs to churn and an action plan to pop out again at a later date. But there is this continued process of engagement, and people have, different organisations have really been galvanised to shift their way of working, their responses to the emerging results of the place standard conversation. Yeah. I'm aware we've kept everyone over time, so unless anybody's got any other key points that they'd like to make or key questions, I think we've only got 14 people left, so we'll maybe finish up. But thank you all. It's been really, really inspiring. On a personal level, also just to hear all of you talk about your experiences, and I'm glad that we've captured it to share it for posterity, because you know these are really moving, inspiring stories of how change can happen.
Hi, Kat. I can see there's one more person looking to pitch a quick question.
Yes.
Claire, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Claire.
No, thank you. No, it's just looking at the various aspects or themes for community members or stakeholders to look at their communities. And it's having moved from East Lothian into Aberdeenshire and struggling with internet connectivity. And I think digital, we're in a digital environment just now. That's how we're engaging. It's becoming more and more prevalent in healthcare and education and employment. And that's not really in there, and it's something that is a big issue for me, and I know for other people in rural areas of Scotland. And I suppose the place standards can be adapted, but it is significant, I think, and I don't know kind of how that can be looked at when we're looking at communities.
Thank you, Claire. Actually, that's a really good point, and I'm glad you raised it, because I think that's one thing that we didn't really cover in the introduction. When the tool was launched in 2015, and quite quickly we identified quite a few gaps, digital being one of them, and I think the pandemic has highlighted that even further. But over the last couple of years, we've been doing an improvement process on the tool. We've done a lot of stakeholder engagement and have actually created a new tool which does include reference to digital. And that tool is, also addresses some of the other gaps. I think lifelong learning was something that had also been identified in the early stuff. So we've looked at the questions, to try and make them a bit broader so people can bring their own concerns, and specifically to try and address some of those gaps. The new tool will be launched imminently. We're building a new online version of it, and it's going to go up on there. We've had some technical issues, so launch is delayed, but we hope over the next couple of months we will be releasing the new version of the tool. It retains the same 14 themes, but it's just been enhanced to try and address that, and also try and open up the conversation about climate change and the future. And going alongside that, we're also working to develop children and young people's versions of it. So Anne, maybe if you're still there, maybe I'll speak to you about that too. So they will all be launched on the new website along with translations. So thank you for raising that.
It's absolutely great, because we talk about physical environment, we talk about social environment, but we've got a digital environment too. And that's really important just now, and we've learned that through the pandemic. But there's also, a significant kind of part of the population that aren't in that environment, and that's why I love the idea of having a paper copy and sticking it in barbers and hairdressers and Weatherspoons, because they need a voice too. So no, it's great to hear that that's been taken on board. So no, that's great. Thanks for that, Kat.
Thank you. And thank you all. Enjoy the rest of the day. It's just started to hail violently against the windows here. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Look forward to continuing the conversation. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.